In the misty, wind-swept hills of northern France in the early 11th century, there lived a woman named Herleva. She wasn't born into nobility. In fact, she was nothing more than the daughter of a tanner, a simple worker who made leather goods. But her life took an unexpected turn when she caught the eye of a powerful man, Duke Robert the Magnificent of Normandy. Robert was captivated by Herleva, not just for her beauty, but also for her intelligence and wit. Their connection was deep and passionate, something that transcended their social divide. They began a secret affair, one that would eventually lead to the birth of a son whom they named William. Now, it's important to understand the weight of illegitimacy in those times. William's birth outside of wedlock meant that he had no claim to the dukedom of Normandy, which was held by his father, Robert the Magnificent. It also meant that he faced a life of prejudice and limited opportunities. The rigid social hierarchy of medieval Europe offered little room for social mobility. Being the son of a duke and a tanner's daughter, William's future seemed uncertain at best. However, while William lacked in social standing, he seemed to have inherited from his father, Robert, a strong will and strategic mind. You see, Robert the Magnificent wasn't just any duke. He was ambitious, powerful, and far-sighted. Under his rule, Normandy had become one of the most prosperous and influential duchies in Western Europe. Robert was also a shrewd politician and a valiant warrior. He had expanded the borders of Normandy through strategic alliances and battles, and he had laid the groundwork for an even greater legacy. Tragedy struck when Robert the Magnificent died suddenly at the young age of 61. The year was 1035, and the court was thrown into turmoil. The Duchy of Normandy, with its vast lands and rich resources, was now up for grabs. Amidst this chaos, a young boy named William found himself at the center of a maelstrom of rival barons, assassins, and scheming relatives. You might be wondering, how did this illegitimate child suddenly find himself in line for the throne? Well, it all came down to one crucial detail. Robert the Magnificent, despite his many conquests and ambitions, had a fatal flaw. He had not designated an heir. This lack of a clear successor created a power vacuum, and various nobles saw this as an opportunity to advance their own interests. Enter Hugh, Robert's younger brother. He seized the opportunity presented by the lack of a designated heir and declared himself the new regent of Normandy. With the support of the royal family, Hugh assumed control of the duchy, much to the dismay of William and his mother. For them it was a moment of despair, a feeling of being utterly powerless against the machinations of the royal court. But they weren't alone. Many loyal supporters of Robert the Magnificent, both within the court and among the populace, were incensed by Hugh's audacious move. They felt that William, despite his illegitimate birth, was the true heir to his father's legacy. These supporters became known as the Faction of the Sword, and they rallied around William, seeing in him the embodiment of Robert's spirit. The stage was set for a struggle of wills between Hugh and William, a battle for the very soul of Normandy. Now, let's talk about how William got his hands on that iconic bastard sword. At the tender age of 8, stripped of his birthright and living in exile, William had every reason to feel like a victim of fate. He was an illegitimate child, far from the protection of his father's court, facing the cold realities of life in 11th century Europe. But here's where William's story takes a sharp turn. See, while Hugh, the new regent, enjoyed the trappings of power, he failed to anticipate the strength and resolve of the Faction of the Sword. Led by William's mother Herleva, these loyalists, mostly composed of vassals from the lower nobility and members of the royal family who opposed Hugh, refused to accept his authority. They argued that William, despite being illegitimate, was the true heir to Robert the Magnificent. Moreover, they saw in William the embodiment of his father's virtues, bravery, intelligence, and a strong sense of justice. As time went on, these loyalists grew bolder, launching a series of attacks against Hugh's forces. Among them was a knight named Osborne who played a pivotal role in securing weapons and resources for the faction. One day Osborne returned from a mission with an impressive prize, a massive battle sword. It was an imposing weapon, but it was also a symbol of hope, a tangible representation of the struggle against tyranny. This sword became known as the Bastard Sword, and it symbolized William's legitimacy and his right to reclaim his birthright. For the young boy living in exile, it wasn't just a weapon, it was a beacon of hope. It represented the loyalty and determination of those who stood by him and his mother during their darkest hours. The significance of the sword transcended its material form. It was a rallying cry for the dispossessed, a symbol of resistance against those who sought to keep William from the throne. Every stroke of the sword echoed the determination in William's heart, driving him to action. For a young boy thrust into the maelstrom of medieval politics, the Bastard Sword was more than just a weapon. It was a symbol of his identity, a reminder of his lineage, and a promise of his future. It embodied the struggle that lay ahead, the battles that needed to be fought, and the legacy that needed to be reclaimed. And so, under the watchful eyes of Herleva and his loyal knights, young William grew, training with the sword, honing his skills and preparing for the inevitable showdown with Hugh. It was a baptism by fire, a crash course in survival and statecraft that would shape William's destiny. Each swing of the sword brought him closer to his heritage, each parry and riposte echoing the resilience of Normandy's people. The bastard sword wasn't just a weapon or a symbol. It was a teacher, a silent mentor forging a young warrior into a leader. As the years passed, William didn't just learn how to wield a sword. He learned about loyalty, courage, and the responsibility that came with his lineage. He understood that the sword wasn't just his to inherit, it was his to earn, and earn it he did. At the age of 27, armed with the bastard sword and backed by a coalition of nobles, William marched on the city of Falaise, a key stronghold of Hugh's regime. The siege was intense, a display of medieval military tactics and grim determination. For William and his men, it was a test of endurance, a fight for every inch of ground. But it was also a statement, a declaration that the era of Hugh's rule was coming to an end. As the tension mounted, so did the stakes. The outcome of this siege would determine the fate of Normandy. It was a do-or-die moment, a battle that would either secure William's claim to the throne or end his dreams of ever ruling Normandy. The siege dragged on, each day bringing new challenges, dwindling supplies, and the constant threat of enemy reinforcements. But William held firm, demonstrating a level of strategic thinking and resilience that surprised many. Finally, after weeks of grueling combat and strategic maneuvering, the moment of truth arrived. The bastard sword flashed in the sunlight as William led the final assault on The sight of William at the forefront, sword raised, was a signal for his men. They fought with renewed vigor, pushing Hugh's forces back. Slowly but surely, the tide of the battle turned. In the end, Falaise fell, marking a decisive victory for William and a humiliating defeat for Hugh. As the dust settled and the cheers of victory echoed, one thing became clear: Normandy would never be the same. Years later, when William officially took his place as the Duke of Normandy, the bastard sword was placed in a specially crafted scabbard made of gold and jewels, a testament to his hard-won victory and a symbol of his enduring legacy. Now, if you're enjoying this series and want more content like this, please consider subscribing. Your support helps us bring history to life in a way that's engaging and accessible to everyone. Thanks for watching. This is the Battle of Hastings. By 1066, William's gaze was fixed firmly on England, and when King Edward the Confessor died without an heir, he took his chance. He claimed that the English throne had been promised to him. But Harold Godwinson, a powerful English noble, seized the crown instead. And William, Duke of Normandy, was not a man to accept such an insult lightly. He assembled a huge invasion force, landed in southern England, and marched north with the Pope's blessing to take back what was rightfully his by blood, by conquest, and by divine right. There were many battles during this campaign, but none more important than the Battle of Hastings, which we'll be simulating today. William and his knights will be facing off against the English army under the command of Harold Godwinson. Now, when simulating battles, we always like to be accurate to history. So here we are recreating the battle as accurately as possible from the primary sources. We've got the terrain set up here, which is based on a modern map of the area. We know from the primary sources that the battle took place near a town called Hastings. It doesn't say exactly where within the modern town of Hastings, but it does say it was a field with a ridge running along the top of it. And so we've taken that liberty here to make our battlefield. There's also a wood on the left flank of the English army, and there's supposed to be a little stream running through it. And then there's some low ground on the other side of the ridge. This will actually be our English army. And over here is where William's invading force will begin their advance. So let's get the armies set up first, and then we can talk about the battle itself. The Normans had a much smaller force than the English, probably somewhere around 7,000 men. But they were elite fighters, and they were fighting for Luton land. The English were tired from a long campaign and just wanted it all to be over. Also, because this was 1066 and not 1966, they didn't have any decent rifles. The main force of the Norman army was made up of cavalry. They're known for wearing distinctive mail, surcoats, and helmets, and they wielded long swords and also used but as we talked about in our last video, most of the Norman army was made up of cavalry. They did have some infantry, though, that were distinguished by their conical helmets. This is what a typical knight from William's army would look like. Now, the English army was bigger, probably about 10 or 15,000 men. But again, they were exhausted and just wanted it to be over. The main force of their army was made up of infantry, men who fought in tight groups wielding axes and swords. They were also pretty heavily armored, too, even more so than the Normans. But their armor wasn't as standardized. A lot of it was just leftover stuff from previous wars that just kind of cobbled together. Here's one of the warriors from Harold's army. As we begin the battle, the English army is drawn up on the ridge with their cavalry on the flanks, and William's force is advancing toward them. Right away, we can see that William has the smaller force. You can see that they're bunched up here. He's going to need to use his cavalry effectively if he wants to beat Harold's army. Now, this looks pretty chaotic right now, but these guys are actually very well disciplined. What's happening here is that they're using a tactic called a wheel. They're turning their horses so that their right sides face out and their left sides face forward. That way, if anyone gets knocked off their horse, they don't get trampled by their own men. Also, by turning their horses to the side, they have a much longer reach with their swords. The English can only slash forward, but the Normans can cut both ways. We can see that the English are responding to this by holding their ground and forming shield walls. This is going to be the main tactic that the English use during the battle. They'll hold their shields up, protecting themselves from the Norman cavalry charges. And then the LL use their swords and their axes to hack at the knights and try to knock them off their horses. At this point, we can see that the Normans have broken through the English lines. You can see the English soldiers falling back into their second line, but they're having trouble getting their shields up. There's lots of openings between their shields and their body. You can see that guy's helmet just got knocked clean off his head. William has sent his cavalry charging again. Now, this time though, the English are ready for them. They're standing behind their shields, hacking away at the knights, but the Normans are relentless, and they finally break through the English lines again. At this point, William sends some infantry into the fray. You can see they're wearing those distinctive conical helmets. They push their way into the middle of the English army. They're trying to get to Harold. They haven't spotted him yet though. He's hiding behind a shield wall right here on the far left wing. The Normans aren't gonna like this though, because they're about to run into a group of English cavalry. It's not looking good for William at this point. His cavalry has been worn down by the English shield wall. If Harold can just lead his cavalry around the end of the battlefield here, he might be able to trap William's force. But you know, in real life, we know that that's not what happens. The Normans win the battle. But how could that be? Well, as we said, the Normans weren't as numerous as the English, but they were more disciplined, and William was a brilliant tactician. Remember that famous painting of the battle done by a 19th century artist? Well, there's a lot of detail in there that we can use to figure out what happened next. Look at the bottom right of the painting. You can see a small band of knights riding hard toward the English center. These are William's cavalry, and they're finally spotting Harold. Look at Harold's horse. He's exhausted. He's slumped over like that. And you can see the saddle is broken. That's because Harold has been fighting since before dawn that day, and William knew that if he could just get to him, he could win the battle. Now, at this point in the battle, the Normans are really pushing hard. They know that if they can get to Harold, they can win the battle, but Harold is holding firm. His shield wall is still intact. His knights are still fighting bravely, but you can tell from this picture that it's not looking good for him. His knights are exhausted. His shield wall is broken, and William is closing in. You can see his knights just pouring into the English ranks. At this point, Harold knows that it's over. He's been fighting for 12 hours. His men are exhausted, and he's just mortally wounded. You can see his knights breaking and running. All hope is lost. Harold is dead. The battle is over. William has won, and so ends the Battle of Hastings. William was victorious, but it was a costly victory. The Norman force was nearly annihilated, but they had achieved their goal. Harold was dead, and the English army was shattered. William marched into London and forced the English nobles to crown him king. On Christmas Day of 1066, William the Conqueror entered the legend of England. Now, if you want to learn more about this battle, check out my channel. There's already been a lot of content posted there, including a video on the Bayeux Tapestry, which depicts scenes from this battle. There's also another video on the aftermath of the battle and William's conquest of England. Check it out. I'm the host of the show, and remember, you can become a member at our website. You can get exclusive access to our server, which is a great community of people who love history and strategy games. Thanks for watching. A long-awaited invasion has finally begun. After years of preparation, William, Duke of Normandy, has assembled a formidable army. They've come to claim England's throne for him. The stage is set for one of history's most famous battles. Will our hero succeed in claiming the throne, or will the English prevail? On December 14th, 1066, the year of our Lord, Duke William of Normandy crossed the English Channel with 7,000 soldiers to lay siege to England. A few weeks earlier, King Harold Godwinson had landed in northern France to confront him, but returned home, leaving William to pillage the coast. Then began the long wait for Harold to arrive with his army. When he did, William and his men stood firm at Hastings and won a decisive victory, killing Harold and establishing himself as the new King of England. William the Conqueror had arrived, but now the real work was beginning. How does one man reshape an entire nation? Welcome to my channel. Today we're talking about how William the Conqueror changed England forever. When William took the throne, England looked very different than it does today. Its population was sparse and much of the country was deforested. Its towns were small and its economy underdeveloped. But it was a resilient kingdom with a proud history and fierce people. For William to rule this land, he needed the support of its people. In order to solidify his power, William first turned his attention to the English nobility, who opposed him and launched a series of military campaigns to subjugate them. Castles were built across England to assert Norman dominance. The Tower of London, which began life as a wooden structure in 1066, was replaced by a stone tower in 1078, symbolizing the enduring nature of William's conquest. As the seat of royal authority, these fortifications also served as homes for Norman nobles appointed by William to govern the country in his name. To replace the disloyal Anglo-Saxon nobility, William imported hundreds of Norman landowners and granted them vast tracts of land confiscated from Saxon nobles. These Norman barons were obligated to provide military service to the crown in exchange for their land, forming a loyal and disciplined fighting force that secured William's position in England. This change in leadership brought a new cultural influence to the country. Normans with their French language and customs intermixed with the existing Anglo-Saxon population. This fusion of cultures gave rise to a distinct English identity that would echo throughout history. However, William didn't stop there. To understand the extent of his rule, he commissioned the Domesday Book, a comprehensive survey of his kingdom's wealth and resources. Completed in 1086, it remains the most detailed contemporary record of medieval England and provides insights into every aspect of life at the time. Through the Domesday Book, William gained knowledge about the productivity and tax potential of his new territories, allowing him to levy taxes more efficiently. He reformed the English system of justice, introduced a new currency, and reformed the English church, placing it under the authority of the Archbishop of Canterbury. His reforms were not always gentle. In 1075, William crushed a rebellion led by the English Earls of North Hereward the Wake and Edgar Atheling, who sought to restore Anglo-Saxon rule. The suppression of this revolt solidified William's authority and demonstrated his willingness to use force to maintain control. But despite this, or perhaps because of it, William's reign marked a turning point in English history. Under his leadership, England became a centralized monarchy with a powerful king and a loyal baronial class. The groundwork was laid for a strong central government that would shape the course of English history. But this wasn't all William accomplished during his reign. While William is known for his administrative and legal reforms, it's essential to recognize his significant contributions to architecture and urban planning. Throughout his reign, William invested in the construction of numerous buildings, including churches, monasteries, and castles, which not only showcased his power but also served practical purposes in defense and governance. One of the most iconic structures that bears witness to William's architectural legacy is the White Tower of London, the heart of the Tower of London complex. Originally constructed in 1078, this massive stone tower served as both a royal residence and a symbol of Norman authority in the English capital. Its imposing presence overlooking the city reminded all who saw it of the power of the crown. Beyond the walls of the White Tower, William's vision extended to other parts of London. He recognized the strategic importance of the city and worked to enhance its infrastructure and prominence. In fact, under William's rule, London experienced a period of growth and development, becoming a bustling center of trade and commerce once again. William encouraged the establishment of markets and fairs, which attracted merchants and artisans from across the kingdom. But William's contributions to architecture weren't limited to London. He understood the significance of strategic locations and built castles in key areas across England to strengthen his control and protect his realm. These castles, such as the imposing Warwick Castle and the historic Rochester Castle, served multiple purposes. Not only did they demonstrate Norman military superiority, but they also functioned as administrative centers and residences for Norman officials appointed to oversee the local populations. Though often remembered as a harsh and ruthless ruler, it is crucial to recognize that William the Conqueror was also a visionary leader who laid the foundations for modern England. He reshaped the legal and social order of the land, leaving behind a legacy that would echo through the centuries. So what are some of William's harshest acts? Well, William's reign wasn't all sunshine and roses, especially for those who opposed him. Let's talk about some of his less savory acts. First up, remember the Anglo-Saxons? Yeah, they weren't too happy about William showing up and taking their king's throne, so naturally, they rebelled. But William put down these rebellions with brutal efficiency, executing many of the Anglo-Saxon nobility. And let's be real, this wasn't exactly a very inclusive ruler. He brought over tons of Normans to take over the land and basically shoved the Anglo-Saxons to the side. Talk about a major culture clash. But it wasn't just the Anglo-Saxons who felt William's wrath. Remember the English church? Yeah, he shook things up there too. William wanted the Archbishop of Canterbury to bend the knee to him, and when he didn't get his way, he threatened to invade Canterbury unless the Archbishop resigned. And let's just say things got a little violent when the Archbishop refused. William's men went in, sacked the place, and killed 4 of the monks. Yeah, things were definitely tense. Despite all this, William's legacy lives on. He is remembered as one of the most important figures in English history and is known for his contributions to the development of the English language, legal system, and culture. While he may have been a bit of a tyrant, he also helped shape the England we know today. So maybe there's more to him than meets the eye. It is undeniable that William's invasion and subsequent reforms had a profound impact on the course of English history. Before his arrival, England was a kingdom with its own unique culture, language, and traditions. But William's conquest marked a turning point that would change everything. One of the most significant impacts of William's invasion was the introduction of Norman culture and customs into England. As William and his followers seized control of the country, they brought with them the language, customs, and traditions of Normandy, which gradually blended with the existing Anglo-Saxon culture to create a distinct Anglo-Norman culture. This fusion of cultures had a lasting impact on English society. For example, Old French, the language of the Normans, became the dominant language of the English court and aristocracy. influencing the development of the English language. Similarly, Norman customs and traditions, such as the use of heraldry and the introduction of chivalry, took root in England and shaped the country's cultural landscape. Another significant impact of William's invasion was the introduction of new agricultural practices and technologies. The Normans were skilled farmers, and they brought with them new techniques for crop rotation and animal husbandry that increased agricultural productivity in England. They also introduced new technologies, such as the heavy plough, which allowed farmers to cultivate heavier soils and produce more food. These agricultural innovations helped to sustain the growing population of England and laid the foundation for the country's economic development. William's reforms aimed at centralizing power and controlling the nobility. By replacing the Anglo-Saxon nobility with loyal Norman barons, he created a more centralized and controllable system of government. This centralization of power enabled the English monarchy to raise taxes and build infrastructure such as roads and bridges, which further contributed to the country's economic development. Moreover, William's legal reforms, including the introduction of the English common law system, provided a more stable and predictable legal framework for the country. These reforms helped to create a climate of stability and predictability that made England more attractive to investors and merchants, further stimulating economic growth. The effects of William's reforms on England's social structure were equally profound. The introduction of a centralized and controllable system of government, along with new agricultural practices and economic opportunities, led to the emergence of a new social order in England. The Norman Conquest also led to significant changes in the religious landscape of England. William's decision to bring the English Church under the authority of the Archbishop of Canterbury established a closer relationship between the Church and the state, which would have profound implications for the role of the Church in English society for centuries to come. In conclusion, the impact of William's reforms on England was nothing short of transformative. His invasion and subsequent reforms changed the course of English history and shaped the country's culture, economy, and society in profound ways. From the introduction of Norman culture and customs to the creation of a more centralized and controllable system of government, William's reforms had far-reaching consequences that would echo through the centuries. England would never be the same again. William the Conqueror died in 1087 while campaigning in France. His legacy, however, lived on. He became known as William the Conqueror, a nickname that reflected both his military victories and his lasting impact on England. William's vision for a centralized and controlled England was realized, laying the foundation for a strong monarchy and a stable political system that would shape the course of English history for centuries to come. Now it's time to hear from you. What did you find most interesting about William the Conqueror? Do you think he was a hero or a villain? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more historical tales.